Moderna's Covid-19 vaccine could arrive in Singapore as early as this month if it gets approved by the authorities.
Coming to a restaurant near you, Singapore is the first in the world to allow the sale of cell-cultured meat.
And Hong Kong says the next 2 weeks will be critical for the city to contain its latest wave of Covid-19 cases.
Welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
I'm Harian. To demand you can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. We start with Singapore's latest COVID-19 numbers. 2 new cases were confirmed today, the lowest number of daily cases in more than 2 weeks. None were in the community or from within workers' dormitories.
The 2 cases were imported and had been placed on stay-home notices when they arrived in Singapore. The Health Ministry will share more details later tonight.
Meanwhile, 3 mosques that were visited by COVID-19 patients will be closed for cleaning and disinfection today. The mosques are Ahmad Mosque in Pasir Panjang, Temenggung Deng Ibrahim Mosque in Harbourfront and Naim Mosque in Hougang.
The Islamic Religious Council of Singapore said that the mosques will reopen tomorrow, pending inspection and confirmation from the relevant agencies.
Now, separately, the Health Sciences Authority has started evaluating the available data submitted by COVID-19 vaccine developer Moderna to ensure expeditious review. An HSA spokesman said Moderna has started submitting initial data and will continue to roll in data as soon as they become available.
And if all goes well, the first vaccines could arrive as early as this month. Moderna Chief Executive Stefan Bancel spoke to our Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan last night.
So Stefan, Moderna's latest results from its late-stage trials has got the world really excited, and it's the same for us here in Singapore. And you were telling me that you have submitted an application to the US FDA for emergency use of your vaccine in the US. What do you think this means for Singapore?
In terms of timelines, we started to discuss with Health Singapore to submit to them all the information. It's really, of course, their prerogative of how long they're going to take to review the file, but I could anticipate either in December or January, they will be comfortable with all the data, and as soon as it's possible, then we'll be shipping vaccines to Singapore.
So do you have any information of how many doses that could be?
We have information, but because this has not been disclosed yet by Singapore government, I'm not allowed to disclose at this time, but the Singapore government very early, back last summer, has been ordering doses for its inhabitants and has been ordering more recently with more data. So there will be a vaccine for Singapore.
On the US side, they've been saying that, the Americans could get vaccinated as early as maybe middle of next month. So and you're saying in Singapore, it could be end of next month or even January?
Correct. So in the US, we have a meeting with the FDA for their scientific advisory board on December 17. What we'll expect is within 24 to 72 hours after that meeting that we could get emergency use approval. What we have worked with the US government is to have within 24 hours of the approval, starting vaccination. So now let's turn to Singapore. Singapore, I need to have an approval so we can ship the product to the country. As you know, medicine is very important to be well controlled and well documented. So we've started to send to Singapore, Health Singapore, the information for preclinical data in animal, phase 1, phase 2, and now phase 3, all the manufacturing files. And we're going to have a dialogue, like is very typical, to exchange data and to answer all their questions. When they're going to be satisfied that the product to their standard is safe and can be taken, they will give us an approval. At that time, whether in December or January, at that time, we will be shipping right away products to Singapore. So inoculation and vaccination can start.
And that was Stefan Bancel, Chief Executive of Moderna, speaking to Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan.
Moderna has applied for emergency use authorization of its vaccine in the US, and this follows the release of the full results from its late-stage clinical trial, which showed that it was 94.1% effective in preventing COVID-19 and 100% effective in preventing severe disease.
Now, the full interview is on the videos page on straitstimes.com.
Well, Audrey is also tracking another story on cell-cultured meat potentially being served in restaurants here. This will be a world's first, as cultured meat isn't yet available for sale and consumption anywhere else.
This cell-cultured meat product will be bite-sized chicken from Californian startup Eat Just, and will be manufactured in Singapore now that the Singapore Food Agency has deemed it safe for consumption. The chicken bites also have the potential to be halal certified, something that Eat Just will consider in the future.
Well, Audrey is here to tell us more. Could you briefly share more about the science behind it? We're more familiar with Impossible meat, of course. So how is cell-cultured meat produced differently?
So yeah, Impossible burgers are something that many of us know about now, but actually it's not new in that it's still a plant-based meat. So I think we're all quite familiar with plant-based meats or mock meats being sold outside. So it's not really considered a novel food. Cell culture meats are different in that it is not made from a plant part. Cell culture, in essence, means the scientist or the group would source for cells from an animal and then grow them in a favorable artificial environment. So hence cell culture. And basically you grow the cells in a suitable medium, and that provides the nutrients for the cell to grow. And yeah, there's a lot of talk about like this new Eat Just nuggets being lab-grown meat. But the Eat Just CEO has said that, this term lab-based meat or lab-grown meat is a red herring. Because now, at the initial R&D phase, yes, some of it might be conducted in a lab, but once it's scaled up, the product will be made in a large bioreactor, similar to like in a brewery, for instance, similar to making beer. So hence it says the term lab-based meat is red herring, and it's also quite value-laden, I think. So some people might have concerns about how natural it is, right, to grow cells in an artificial environment. But if we look at agriculture itself and rearing livestock, what things are like now, factory farming, is also not, say, very natural, because it's a far cry from what we perceive as agriculture from the start, where animals have large spaces to roam and all that. Now they're all packed in tightly confined settings, and it's far from natural, basically, according to the experts that I spoke with.
And Audrey, cultured meat is not yet available for sale and consumption anywhere else in the world. Why do you think Singapore is a pilot market for this?
So yeah, cell-cultured meat is kind of a new area, and while the product would be first sold in Singapore, it has gotten regulatory approval to be sold here. It's worth noting that other countries are also looking into it. But as I said, because it's such a new area, there's no internationally standardized definition of what a novel food is and how it should be regulated. But then again, Singapore has a lot of expertise in terms of food safety. I think we all trust Singapore's brand when it comes to approving food for safe use here. That's one. And also, we also have a very thriving biomedical sector, as we have seen so far. So it is no surprise then that, Singapore is at the forefront of all these innovations.
Well, let's say, cell-cultured meat does become a reality in our restaurants. So what is the impact on Singapore's food sustainability?
So yeah, currently when meat is reared for sale, it spans a huge footprint, right? You grow an animal in a paddock somewhere, and then you ship it elsewhere to be slaughtered. You ship it to another place to be manufactured and packaged and processed, and before it reaches the product. So by doing cell-based meat, cell-cultured meat, you actually collapse the entire footprint of this whole process into one building. And an earlier report by the United Nations Climate Science Panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, had already said that as the global population is going up, there would be increased pressure to feed the human population. And that kind of reason is kind of intertwined with the impacts that agriculture has on our global climate. I mean, when you clear forests to rear cows, to rear other kinds of livestock, that would have an implication on emissions, and that in turn would have impact extreme weather events that could affect food security. So it's really a cyclical kind of environment, cyclical kind of argument. And also, Singapore has also talked a lot about food security. And in the past, we have always said that, we need to diversify our imports. We need to import food from many different countries. But as the pandemic has shown, sometimes when you have global supply disruptions, diversification should not be our only strategy. And using cell-cultured meat will kind of give Singapore additional food security in a sense. It could be manufactured here. And for Eat Just, they have said that their new chicken chicken bites would be manufactured here in Singapore.
So that's it, Audrey. Do you see it taking off in Singapore then, or will other factors like food safety and higher costs deter its take-up rate?
So I think there are multiple elements to look at when you talk about the take-up rate in Singapore. In terms of food safety, I think many Singaporeans already trust our authorities when they determine something is safe. So I don't think there would be much worry on that front. Cost-wise, it just said that it would cost as much as premium chicken for now, although costs would likely drop in the future. I think the biggest obstacle will be changing mindsets about, like I said, lab-based meat, lab-grown meat, and how we can convince people or let them know that, actually it is not going to be like Franken meat or something.
Right. Well, fascinating stuff indeed. It remains to be seen the direction that this cultured meat will go, yeah? Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Audrey. We've been speaking to Audrey Tan, Science and Environment Correspondent for the Straits Times. Also in the local headlines, the Finance Ministry is inviting Singaporeans to share their views and hopes for the upcoming budget slated for February 2021. From now till January 8th, Singaporeans can offer their views on areas like the economy, workforce and environmental sustainability. Government Feedback Unit, REACH, will have listening points set up at high traffic areas, while People's Association and its grassroots organizations will also reach out via virtual engagement platforms.
A second youth linked to the SG Nasi Lemak Telegram chat group, which hosted upskirt images of women here, has been sentenced to a year's probation. The 18-year-old can't be named as he was 17 when he committed the offence. He pleaded guilty in October to possessing 59 obscene films on his mobile phone. As part of his sentence, he must remain indoors from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day and perform 40 hours of community service. Another youth was sentenced to a year's probation in October, and the cases involving 2 other alleged offenders are still pending.
Now, moving overseas, Hong Kong reported 103 new COVID-19 cases today. The number of daily new infections is seeing an upward trend in the past week.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam yesterday urged Hong Kong residents to stay at home and avoid unnecessary family gatherings. But as you can see here, well, people are still out and about, albeit with masks on. Well, these were taken by a Hong Kong correspondent earlier this afternoon at Central and the mid-levels.
Meanwhile, the city has announced tighter restrictions on public gathering for 2 weeks starting today. Dine-in services will end 2 hours earlier at 10 p.m. with patrons capped at 2 per table. Bars, pubs, saunas, clubs, nightclubs and party rooms will remain closed. All amusement, game centres, leisure venues, museums, cinemas, theme parks, karaoke establishments, mahjong clubs and swimming pools must be closed as well.
The government could also raise the current fine of 2,000 Hong Kong dollars for those who breach social distancing measures.
The Straits Times' Hong Kong correspondent Claire Huang is here to share more about the situation on the ground. Claire, are the streets less crowded and are people really staying at home? Because from the videos you sent, it surely doesn't look like it.
Well, Jan, for the 10th straight day, we are looking at daily new infections past 70. So clusters are breaking out everywhere. It's like mini fires everywhere, right? And you've got some in eateries, and of course there's the dance club cluster, which is growing, has gone past hundreds of people. Now we've got a construction site in Cheong Kwan O, and 900 people linked to the construction site, Lohas Park development, are supposed to go for tests. Now, people are still out and about. The footage that I sent are people, in central area, mid-levels, where they're out at about lunchtime. So during the lunchtime, I think you expect people to be out to, grab a meal, right, a bite. But I think in general, even the past few days, and and over the weekend there were heaps of people out and about. I think it's because of, it's the festive season, first of all. People are tired of staying at home. With civil servants working from home now for 2 weeks, I think the private enterprises will start to, some of them at least, will start to follow suit, right? And so that perhaps will keep some people off the streets. But here's a very interesting thing. I've spoken to a local friend, right? And she's like saying that she's still out and about because her idea is that, in terms of the biggest cluster, which is the dance club cluster, right? She's saying that all those people, the socialites, the tai-tais, they go to different places from where she goes. So she feels that she's actually okay going out. So I think that's part of the mentality of some of them whom you see out there. They're saying we don't mix in the same social circle, so I think it's fine.
So Claire, local health authorities have said that this could be Hong Kong's worst COVID-19 wave so far. It's one of those one step forward, two steps back instances. So how is that affecting residents like your friend mentally and psychologically?
Well, Ollie, previously there were studies done, one in Q2 and another one in Q1, okay, at least 2 studies done that found alarming results saying that Hong Kongers are depressed and, the mental health is on the decline. And it's been worsened by the pandemic. Here's where I point out that, a lot of the younger Hong Kongers were depressed because, they had, it was a sort of a fallout from the unrest last year. And then after that, it was followed up by the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So that's kind of weighed down on them. And then, in Hong Kong, unemployment, particularly for the younger age groups, has been on the rise every quarter this year. So, it's a bit of a doom and gloom here. Here's where I point out that Hong Kong is a late night city. And it's because the houses here are tiny and squeezy. So people like to stay out. They don't really like to go home. They like to go to the karaoke lounges where they can sing, eat, drink, hang out outside, because it's stuffy staying in shoebox units, which most Singaporeans would not have, would not really have to suffer with, right? So having to stay at home is quite a challenge for some of the people here, for a lot of the people here, particularly those who live in coffin homes, subdivided flats. So where do they go? Of course, they stay out. They stay out in the parks, but then you need to get shelter, right? And then it's cold now because it's winter. So the silver lining over here is that despite all these doom and gloom, you can still exercise. There are plenty of areas you can go for hiking strolls, and if you're outdoor exercising, you can actually remove your mask, which affords a breather of sorts. Yeah.
So Claire, I want to pick up on the point where you said, they are staying in because of the weather as well. And earlier on, before we got on air with you, we were talking about the winter ahead. So are the authorities taking further precautions to brace for the colder weather?
Well, the government here has been cautioning about the 4th wave of the pandemic since September, October, when the 3rd wave was tapering off, right? And like South Korea and Japan, when it's cold and it's influenza season, having COVID is double whammy. So they were afraid that it would become very serious. As it is, we actually have a respiratory tract infection outbreak in schools. The good thing is that schools are now closed until next year. So, people are trying to get flu jabs and they don't have enough. So they were quite angry with the government, about this. For COVID specifically, though, there's a silver lining of sorts. Health Secretary Sophia Chan said today that the government will provide free vaccines for all residents. 3 million of them will get it first. These people are those who are like medical workers, home care staff, care home staff, and then you've got the elderly and those with chronic diseases. So these people, this group will get the vaccines first, and then Hong Kong is looking at mainland and overseas vaccines and will provide at least 2 doses for each resident, and they will come from different manufacturer.
I see. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Claire. Take care over there. That was our Hong Kong correspondent, Claire Huang.
Looking elsewhere, Britain has become the first country to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for use. Health Secretary Matt Hancock said the vaccine will be rolled out across the UK from next week. Britain's vaccine committee will decide which priority groups will get the jab first, which include care home residents, health and care staff, the elderly and those who are clinically vulnerable.
Well, this news comes as England exits a month-long lockdown, but most of the country remains under a three-tier system of COVID-19 curbs. Most of England's 55 million people will go straight to level 2 or 3, limiting household mixing and the reopening of the hospitality sector. Just 1% of the country are at the less restrictive level 1.
Japan's parliament has passed a bill to provide free coronavirus vaccinations, with the central government covering the cost. This comes amid a new wave of virus infections, which has prompted bars and restaurants to close early in worst-hit areas and forced Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga to partially suspend a travel incentive program. Mr. Suga has vowed to secure enough vaccine doses by the first half of next year.
Meanwhile, according to a Nikkei Business Daily report, Japan aims to admit large-scale numbers of overseas visitors for the Tokyo Olympics. Vaccinations or quarantines won't be imposed, but tourists will have to submit negative COVID-19 test results and download tracking apps on arrival. The report did not specify how many visitors would be allowed, but said Japan will not restrict the use of public transport by foreign travelers. Game organizers have sold nearly 1 million tickets overseas and 4.5 million tickets in Japan.
Thailand's Constitutional Court has declared Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha not guilty in a conflict of interest case. Opposition parliamentarians had filed a petition against Mr. Prayut, who remained in military housing after his retirement from the army in 2014. Mr. Prayut has said that he needs to stay there for security reasons. The latest ruling means that Mr. Prayut can stay in power despite months of protests demanding his removal.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Kwe. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.